Welcome to A Valid Answer with Marshall and Scott, where a atheist and a pastor have discussions about philosophy and current events, and they don't break into fistfights. Right?
So far.
One of these times, one of these days, we're going to say that, and on video, on Facebook Live, you guys are going to be like, and we're going to be like, you guys are going to tune in. We're just going to be, the whole place is going to be tore up. So
it'll be like WWF.
Yeah.
In this corner.
In this corner, I'm not even going to do the weighing in.
In this corner, weighing 100 pounds.
Well, we had our first episode, and that aired, and we're really excited about this podcast and what we're doing. We're definitely looking forward to hearing more from you guys. A valid answer at gmail.com. Join the conversation. Ask some questions. Tell us what we should have said when Marshall said something wrong and I missed it. Then that's your chance, guys, to say, "Hey, Scott, you should have said." And I'm never wrong, so you won't have a chance to say that.
I'm, on the other hand, I'm always wrong. Who do I know? I don't know anything.
So, hey, we just want to kick off real quick that we did not really explain why our show is called A Valid Answer. A Valid Answer.
Yeah.
That the show title came up a few years ago. We've actually been meeting for breakfast for several years now.
Yeah,
I think it's kind of a odd thing that we kind of ran back into each other.
Yeah.
Met up again after being friends in high school and college, and then discovered like, hey, we actually live like down the street from each other. So then we started meeting. Yeah. We lived on the northeast side of Bakersfield. We started meeting, and then I moved.
Yeah, you moved.
You moved just a little bit farther away, but still right around the corner from where I lived.
Yeah, so
and then I moved to the complete opposite side of town. Like it took like 30 minutes when we moved. It was a 30-minute drive to drive from my old house to our new house. And then I kind of lost contact with you, and then suddenly like, hey, let's get together. Where do you live? And it turns out you live
right around the corner,
literally like 5 streets away. He moved, and like, okay. And now, coincidence or whatever, as a pastor, I'm like, okay, God's doing something. Keeps bringing Marshall back in my life. I move halfway. I move all the way across town to get away from him, and then God guides him back into my life by putting him 5 streets away from me. So I'm like, okay, we got to do something. But
I just figured it was a nice, affordable, middle class neighborhood. That explains it to me. But whatever works.
What is it? We're just outside of Seven Oaks, which is a kind of a upper scale area of Bakersfield. So I have a friend of mine who lived in the same area. He called it 6.5 Oaks. So not quite 7 Oaks. We live in 6.5 Oaks.
6 Oaks. Yeah, yes. That works.
But so yeah, we've been talking for a while. We've been meeting up, and we thought about doing a podcast a few years ago. And the name of the podcast, A Valid Answer, came from.
Well, I don't know is a valid answer. There's a lot of people who don't like to admit that they don't know something, and so they kind of come up with something off the top of their head, or they insist that they are correct, and it kind of stifles discussion and it stifles investigation. It's totally okay to say, I don't know, because we don't know. And nobody should expect that anyone's going to have all the answers. And what you should do when you don't know is you go dig further. You do some research.
Yep.
And you might find at the end of your research, hey, nobody knows. This is just a mystery right now. And that's okay. It's okay to have unanswered questions. It's okay to answer, I don't know. That is a perfectly valid answer to a question.
And on the same side, another idea for this definition for the title of the podcast is the idea that sometimes when you're so locked into your point of view that it's easy to miss the idea that the other side of your view does have valid answers as well. That yours is not the only valid answer. That there are. It's not. I'm not saying that there's objective truth. You'll probably say that, but I'm not saying that there's subjective truth. I think that there is objective truth. I think there are things that are no matter what that are right and wrong. And I'm not saying that, well, you have your truth.
And I don't think right and wrong really exists except as a matter of opinion.
But and again, but that doesn't negate the idea that the other side does have a valid point or can have a valid point. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes their position is completely invalid, and we'll point those out, and we'll do those kind of
logical fallacies.
Logical fallacies and all that. But it's perfectly possible to be logical but have a wrong premise. So you still have you still have a valid answer in your logic, but you might be starting from the wrong premise.
Well, I guess if the premise is wrong, then it's not really logical either. But I mean, if you're wrong, you're wrong.
Again, we're going to partially disagree on this. I think you can have wrong information, but make logical conclusions
based on the wrong information.
Based on the wrong information, right. And you're still logical. You're still rational. You're still making sense. It's just what your starting point may be incorrect, and you may not know it.
Right. No. Yeah. Okay. I get that. I agree.
So you still have a valid answer.
I agree. Being a valid answer.
There we go. Look at that. We agree. Pastor and atheist agree. Isn't that awesome? Well, we started off last week. We started light. In case you missed the first episode, we started with a real light conversation. We just jumped right into the gun debate because that was kind of current events and still kind of current events, but kind of current events at the time. And we wanted to just dive right into that. So, but the discussions are going to kind of come and go. I mean, the things are going to flow and stuff like that. But this one kind of flowed into the idea when we're talking about what laws and what things can be created to help curb gun violence. I don't like to use that term personally because the gun isn't actually being violent. The person is being violent. The gun is the tool. You can't have hammer violence. You know what I mean? It's not hammer violence. The person is being violent. The tool is not being violent. The violent action is performed by the person. But for sake of discussion, the topic of gun violence and how to curb gun violence leads to what role does government play in that, and how much should they be involved, and kind of we're going to kind of focus today's discussion a little bit just kind of on what is the ultimate role of government, what is the proper size of government, just stuff like that, and so Marshall has, for those who don't know, Marshall has a background in history, has you have a degree in history. Tell me about that.
I do, yeah. So I took a bunch of economics, government history classes, all of that stuff.
Gotcha.
Social studies, basically. But yeah, it is specifically in history. I believe I concentrated on European history, so a lot of that.
Wow.
Colonial American history. And I'm also very
really relevant stuff here.
Classical history.
Sorry, I'm being
which
facetious.
is the Greeks and the Romans,
Gotcha.
Which I really dig because it's kind of interesting. Whatever situation we seem to face here in this world, it seems like the Greeks and the Romans kind of covered it at some point. The Greeks had hundreds.
There's nothing new under the sun.
There's no new thing under the sun, right?
Bible
the
quote.
Greeks had Ecclesiastes. I love it. It's my favorite book of the Bible.
Because it's such a downer, huh?
But it's a great book. But I was going to say the Greeks had...
Wait, an atheist knows about the Bible?
Well, why do you think I'm an atheist?
Okay, that one deserves a fist bump.
There you go.
That was good.
The Greeks had hundreds of different city-states, so they experimented with a lot of different forms of government. Everything from direct democracy, where you have one person, one vote. Granted, they define person a little different than we would today. But you also had despotism. You had absolute monarchies. You had military dictatorships. Then out of all of that, Alexander comes through and he brings his monarchy in. And then you get the Romans who come in. And the Romans had a republic. I mean, their nation lasted almost 1,000 years. Their empire, civilization, I guess you would say, lasted almost 1,000 years. And for the first half, a little more, they basically had a republic, starting out as a city-state governing the city of Rome and expanding slowly to encompass all of the Italian peninsula, and then eventually expanding outwards, taking over North Africa, Carthage, Carthago delenda est. History buffs out there get that. It means Carthage must be destroyed. Greece and all of the Mediterranean eventually, up all the way as far north as England, up to basically the wall with Scotland, Hadrian's Wall. And Rome turned into an empire with Julius Caesar around 44 BC. Julius Caesar was assassinated, and Julius Caesar became a dictator. So what happened was Roman law and the Roman Republic had a rule where if there's a crisis, the Senate could declare a person as a dictator for a limited period of time, like 6 months. And the idea was the Senate, being a Senate, oftentimes won't be able to respond to a crisis in a timely fashion because of all the infighting and debate.
Yep.
So the way to cut through all of that is you create one person, you give him absolute authority, and his word is final, no matter what you like or not.
Modern equivalent would be basically declaring martial law.
Exactly. Okay. And so what happens is then Caesar doesn't relinquish his power at the end of that, and then he ends up being assassinated.
Caesar was his name? And
Julius Caesar is his yeah.
Or was that already a title, or to become a title because of his name?
I think it was a title. But
Caesar was already a title of authority?
I don't know. I don't know. So there's my valid answer. I don't know.
Good.
I don't want to speculate on that.
Gotcha.
It's been so long. But just Julius Caesar, right? And we all know who he was. Julius, I believe, became the family name, or was a family name, but I could be wrong about that. It's been a long time.
Yeah.
Anyway, now my ignorance is showing.
No,
Thanks, Scott.
No. I ask you because I don't know.
Yeah,
so,
I don't remember.
Gotcha.
And there was a time, I do remember my particular professor going over this with us, and it didn't stick.
Not everything can.
I haven't had a need to recall that since college. It's been like 20
I took
years.
graphic design classes, and I'm a graphic artist by trade and a videographer and stuff like that. And I only remember the first two rules of graphic design of unity, variety, emphasis, and then rhythm and direction. And then there was like 4 more or something like that. And I don't remember what they were.
Yeah.
And that's my business. So
well, there you go. Anyway, Caesar becomes dictator. He's assassinated, and then his nephew, Augustus, who becomes Augustus Caesar, he's an adopted nephew, marches on Rome with his legions, gets rid of the people by various means who were responsible for the assassination of Caesar, and sets himself up sort of as the president of the Senate. And he never quite refers to himself as emperor, but he becomes emperor. And from that point on, power is passed on through family lines. For a while, staying in Julius Caesar's extended family,
Gotcha.
And then passing on to other people.
Eventually, is the Senate dissolved?
No, I believe the Senate remains, but the Senate's power is subservient to the power of the emperor.
How does all that then relate to governments today?
Well, my point is there are lessons from classical history that we can take and apply to governments today. Whatever situation a government faces today, we can look at a similar situation in ancient history and say, well, here's a lesson. Here's something to draw from. The Founding Fathers understood this, and there is a reason why the White House and the Capitol building look like Roman temples, because they were tipping their hat, as you will, to the ancient Romans who had kind of already covered all of this ground. The very idea of a republic is really a Roman invention, and it's the type of government we have today. People mistakenly say
we do not have a democracy.
Right. They say we have a democracy. We don't. It's actually a republic. And in a republic, the people vote for a representative, and it's the representatives who make the laws and so on by which we all live by.
Gotcha. So coming to modern times and where we're at now, and even going back a couple hundred years to the founders of the United States, I like U.S. history. I don't have the same education in history that you do, and I didn't actually like it when I was in high school. I was always just trying to get through it.
Probably poorly taught then.
I don't want to. We probably had the same teacher at Foothill, so I don't want to disparage.
I loved it.
Yeah, so I don't want to.
A different taste.
You know what got me was BC. What is the history teacher's name there at the time?
There were several.
He was such a good history teacher. I'm like, oh, I suddenly got it, and suddenly I loved history. But the idea that the founders came from a system of government that was completely totalitarian, overpowering, overreaching, had basically all. I mean, there was a parliament. There was a parliament, but basically the king.
Well, I would argue with you there, because believe it or not, the 13 colonies were the most free place on the planet at the time of the American Revolution.
Because of distance.
Well, for a variety of reasons. Yeah, distance was certainly one of them. Other reasons included the fact that no, England was not a totalitarian state. Yes, the king had a lot of authority, but it was you still had a parliament, and you still had sort of a constitution. They started with the Magna Carta, and over time various documents were adopted by the English government, which gave rights to certain people. And this
But
is probably the only nation in the world.
Could the king not take those rights away?
Well, he tried to. And there were several struggles throughout here. There were several times throughout history where several kings tried to take power away from the people in the parliament and so on.
Mm-hmm.
There's a constant tug of war. In the 1600s, around 1650, there was the English Civil War. And one of those was King Charles I of England literally marched soldiers into Parliament to intimidate Parliament into accepting his authority as literally, more or less, as an absolute ruler. And Parliament, of course, rebelled, literally, and you ended up with the English Civil War, where there was a series of battles being fought, and there was a religious dispute between Charles, who is now the head of the Church of England, and the Parliament, which had become largely Puritan. There was the Puritan religious influence.
Ultimately, what came of that Civil War?
Well, the Puritans won out. The New Model Army, Oliver Cromwell, their leader, ended up winning out, and he became a military dictator for the next basically 10 years.
So
Charles I was beheaded for treason.
Meet the new boss, same as the old boss?
More or less, right? And then at the end of Cromwell's rule, Parliament was like, well, what do we do? Let's go back to the monarchy. And they invite Charles I's son to come be king.
Which isn't that far off from what happened in America, what almost happened in America at the end of the Revolutionary War, where they said, let's make George Washington king.
Right. And George Washington was like, whoa, wait a minute, Yeah.
And why? Why did he turn that down?
I think humility, wisdom. I really do. I think he was a very wise ruler. He was a humble ruler. He was very remarkably well educated. He wrote his little Rules for Civility, which is this great little book that teaches you how to have manners and be polite to other people. And it's a fantastic little read.
But he wasn't the only one. There were, even though there were some people who were like, let's make him king, what the idea that overcame ultimately was not to go back to a monarchy, not to go back to dictator type rule, and ultimately not to create a big government.
Right. And we're getting into our big question today, which is what should the role of government be? And we get into the Bill of Rights, and I really like the Bill of Rights because if I were to answer that question, which I'm going to do right now, the Bill of Rights is a big part of that. My answer to the question of what should government be is this: it should be whatever the people want it to be, with frank exceptions. And the Bill of Rights represents those frank exceptions, that a government cannot tread on these rights under any circumstances whatsoever. I would prefer, rather than the U.S. Bill of Rights, I would uphold or offer the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights.
Because the United Nations is really effective. Well,
regardless of that, I don't want to get into that. But they basically enumerate 30 basic rights that all human beings should have. And those rights should not be taken away, certainly without due process. And I kind of like the idea. And then the people should be allowed to decide what kind of government works for them. And the people may decide that a libertarian system or an anarcho-libertarian system with virtually no government, or they might choose social democracy, or they could choose some other form of socialism. They could choose to live in a communist state. That's up to the people. And that decision is often based on the experiences and the situation that people face at the time.
Well, let's be honest here. A lot of times that decision is based on the propaganda of whoever is in charge. That they will push
it's all
that propaganda.
We're constantly being bombarded with propaganda, even pro-democracy.
I mean, how much are people
propaganda.
actually choosing stuff like communism?
I'm sorry, what's the question?
How often are people actually choosing something like communism compared to it being presented in a disingenuous way?
Well, and I think the disingenuous presentation is very common across all forms of government, across the whole political spectrum. A lot of times people don't know what they're choosing, and that's a problem with education. That's a problem with the information channels, media worldwide. You have basically certain people have control of the media, and so they're bombarding you with their message and their propaganda. And unless you are a free and independent thinker, unless you are educated, you are not going to see through the propaganda and reason things out for yourself.
That's why it's important to engage in discussions like this. It's important to exercise that brain muscle. And instead of just, again, I'm going to go back to the idea of people just posting memes on the internet. That doesn't do anything. That doesn't. That's.
I like memes, but I agree they are low information.
Low information.
Yeah.
Where you're just talking about the other side instead of talking with the other side. Talking with the other side keeps you educated, keeps you balanced, keeps you. This is why I really believe in this podcast. Why I really believe in what you and I are doing right here is that this is what is supposed to happen. This is to what you're saying to keep the populace more educated, more involved. It's this type of thing of not just throwing mud at the other side, but standing with the other side and discussing.
Yeah, and we live in a world now where everybody carries in their pocket a device whereby they can access unlimited information. We use it to share memes of cats,
and also by which they can disseminate false information.
Yeah, that's right, and we're hearing about the Russian trying propaganda in social media and stuff like that, and I'm certain that that's happening, and I'm certain that we're doing this overseas ourselves. It's just one of those things.
Isn't that like one of the primary charters of the CIA?
Right, more or less, yeah. So I think that the people should be allowed to choose for themselves what kind of system they want to live under, but they have to be allowed to choose. And that would probably go back to the UN UDHR, that's the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and the idea that all people are entitled to education and they're entitled to a vote. And I think if you give people education and a vote, then we have to respect their choices. So if somebody wants to live in a communist socialist regime, and that's literally what the vote comes down, and the people are conscious of their decision and they make that choice, that's their choice. Who are we to say, no, you cannot have that system of government? Who are we?
I think ultimately, and one of the things that I do admire about the founders of the United States with the idea of small government, that I don't believe in anarchy. I don't believe in mob rule. I don't believe in survival of the fittest. But I do believe very much so in limited government, because the more powerful government becomes, the more it's susceptible to corruption, the more it can be used for the wrong things in corrupt ways. Everything that we look at in this country of corporations being corrupt and getting, the things that you talk about all the time, the corporations you get all these tax breaks that really were subsidizing corporations instead of, when we talk about the minimum wage debate and everything like that,
right.
it all comes down to the idea that corporations are able to skip out on what they have to pay and skip out on what they have to do and everything. But all of that power that corporations have comes directly from what they're able to manipulate the government to do. That the corporations the corporations themselves don't have power over us. It's what they're able to manipulate the government to do that gives them power over us, because they're manipulating the government. So the bigger the government, the more susceptible it is to corruption, and the more powerful it is, the more power it gives to the rich and powerful. Whereas if you reduce the size of government, if you reduce the role of government, if you make government as small as possible to still keep order, then it takes away, not only does it take away the power of the government, it takes away the power of the corporations and the power of the elite, who could possibly corruptly use the government in that way.
Right. One of the problems we have is it's too easy for a wealthy individual or a wealthy corporation to convert money into political power, because we have these campaign finance laws that are very liberal that allow a company to basically provide, make unlimited campaign contributions.
Yep.
Basically, they're literally buying senators and representatives. And I think that's at the heart of a lot of the problems that we face as a nation, and we have to fix that problem.
Yep.
I think that's our number one problem as a nation right now. That's what's destroying the republic.
I can see that. I just feel that
if you limit the government,
the most effective,
then it doesn't matter who owns you, right? Because the government can't.
There's only so much. There's only so much that the government can do to you.
Right. There are other problems though, because if government can't do certain things, if it can't, let's say, how do I want to approach this?
I mean, why does the government? Why is it that the government can say you have to wear a seatbelt?
Well, because it's a safety thing.
But it's your personal safety. Why should that be part of what the government says?
And I think that's a worthy debate.
Because motorcycle helmets. I'm just saying, just right there, motorcycle helmets and safety belts. Whether you wear a helmet or whether you wear a seatbelt has no effect on any other driver, no effect on anybody else. It only affects you. So why does the government have the power to say you have to?
I disagree. It does affect me, because if you and I are involved in an accident and there's a difference between you go to the hospital with a broken bone versus you're dead, that does impact me. I've been involved in a fatal accident, even if it's not my fault, or even if it is my fault. I don't want you dead. Mm-hmm. I don't want you to be hurt or injured. And if a seatbelt or a helmet would prevent that, will save me a lot of grief.
If it wasn't
it affects our insurance rates. It affects hospital admissions. It affects the prices that we all pay when we have to go to the doctor. It means more patients in the hospital and things like that.
No, and it means less patients in the hospital because they're dead.
Well, maybe not. But basically, I think there is a communal aspect to our individual choices. We think we make a choice and it affects only us. I disagree. I think a lot of the choices that we think affect only us do affect the broader community.
But why does that necessitate that the government needs to get involved and do something? Because once you open that's the problem. Once you open that floodgate,
sure.
Then now you have New York saying you can't buy a 24-ounce soda.
Right.
That's ridiculous. That is a ridiculous abuse of governmental power.
Well, and we can argue that.
And that's what I'm saying.
I don't think
once you open the floodgates,
they're banning you from buying a 24-ounce soda, by the way.
Yeah, they're not. They're banning companies from selling them.
Okay, so you buy 2 12-ounce.
Right, which is stupid because that's legal. You can buy 2 12-ounces, but you can't buy. Well, actually, I think you can buy 2 12. I can't remember the exact size.
Sounds like a 36 silly and frivolous law.
It is. It's a completely.
But ultimately,
how many silly and frivolous laws do we have? Is there an extension cord around here? You guys buy an extension cord and it has like 17 things on there, all from a lawsuit from somewhere because it says, I didn't know to not plug in the electrical outlet while I was standing in the water. So I'm going to. So now you have to have a regulatory body that determines what's. It's like, no, if people are stupid, people are stupid. Where does it end?
Sure,
and it's gotten completely out of control. And it's like government should not be this big, this overpowering, this much into the personal lives of people.
Well, I think it can be if we decide we want it to be that way. It's up to us.
Oh, well, I'm just saying, in general, the bigger government is, the more it oppresses its people. I don't think that. I don't care what.
I don't think a seatbelt or a helmet law counts as oppression.
Yeah.
How is that oppression? I mean, maybe in the most low grade possible manner of the definition. I mean, I'm thinking oppression is like you can't have a religious viewpoint that's different from what the king or the dictator has. Well, that's oppression.
Yeah.
Like we're going to throw you in the gulag because we don't like your political philosophy.
Right.
That's
so if
oppression.
I'm driving down the street and I've done nothing else wrong, but the police officer sees that I have my seatbelt on, he can pull me over and fine me.
Yeah.
For
that's
that I've done nothing.
We've decided we want to live in.
But I'm saying right. That's what is, and I'm talking about what
should be.
What should be, and I don't think the government should ever be that big. Okay, that overreaching.
Then that's what I think you should advocate for, and that is what you're advocating for. And that's how you should inform your votes. So that information, that philosophy should inform your decision-making and your voting and so on. And I think that's valid. That's a valid answer. That's a great perspective to have. Just as my personal philosophy and my ideas inform how I vote. So I'm probably going to vote in favor of a seatbelt law. Probably going to vote in favor of a helmet law. I don't know about a soda law. I kind of like sodas, as you can tell. But ultimately, I do think that is kind of silly because you could buy 2 12-ounce. I think what they're trying to do is it's more of a syntax thing, that making you buy 2 12 is more expensive than 124, and that does translate.
The whole idea of a sin tax is just a gross overreaching.
It does translate into better health outcomes. That's the idea. If we were to reduce soda consumption in the United States,
why can't I be independent?
You can be, but it's going to cost you more. And the reason it's going to cost you more is because when you make poor health choices, it costs everybody else more.
Doesn't have to.
And we are letting it cost more. That's why you have to buy 2 12. But it does because we are linked together. We're linked. We're all connected. We're connected not just in sort of a metaphysical sense that, we're all of the same atoms and all that, but we're also connected economically. Mm-hmm. And the decisions that I make have an impact on your finances. They're very, very tiny. But when you take thousands and thousands of marshals, and we all make the same decision, that has a larger and larger impact on your situation. It has an impact on your wait time in the ER, has an impact on your insurance costs and things like that.
But
it
I don't
does
have
an impact. It
but
adds up.
But I don't have a problem with people taking and owning responsibility. The more you allow government to regulate you, the more you abdicate your own responsibility.
Well, I agree that in the again, ideal, that's what it should be. But we live in a low information society. Look at the state of education. You know, until people are educated and they can learn how to think for themselves, the nanny government's going to grow. I would agree with you, Scott.
Again, I'll fight that to my last breath, because I don't want the nanny state telling me what to do, because I am an educated and
So what's the solution? Education, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, get people to think for themselves. So even though we disagree on this whole government thing, we certainly agree on the solution. And I would prefer to live in your world than mine. It would be great if there wasn't a government who had to pass a seatbelt law, because we all just knew, hey, buckle up when you get in a car. That would be great. That's the ideal. I agree with you.
Well,
but we don't live in that world. We live in a world where people make poor choices or they advocate responsibility. So we have to pass a law to make them be responsible. But we don't have to pass a law.
No, you don't have to. You don't have to pass a law to make people responsible. You just hold them responsible.
That would be a law. There has to be a legal basis to hold a person responsible. So that's a
law.
No.
No. What I'm saying is, you're talking about laws that force people to be responsible. I'm talking about laws that go ahead and just punish irresponsibility. Well, there's a difference. What's happening is that I believe in laws. I believe in punitive laws. That's what laws, you punish the crime. I don't believe in laws that say, I'm going to stop you before you commit a crime, even though there's no evidence that you're going to commit a crime, even though there's no, yeah.
What about in your house? As a parent, you have laws, you have rules. You won't call them laws, you call them rules. Do you have rules in your house that prevent your children from getting into trouble?
Yes, because they are my children until they're 18. Those
like
laws,
a curfew rule, right?
Right, but they're my children. They're my responsibility until they're 18. Those laws no longer apply to them once they're an individual.
Right.
I'm an individual. The government has no right to tell me as an individual how I'm supposed to behave.
So you're not going to set a curfew for your kid when he turns 18?
No.
If he lives with you?
If he lives with me, yes.
Okay.
If he lives with me,
you're going to have rules under your roof.
Under my roof, yes. I am.
Because, and that's totally reasonable. That's
because great. I'm responsible for them. The government is not responsible for me.
No, not once you're 18.
Right, but I'm just saying the analogy doesn't work, because I am not a subject of the government. I am not a dependent on the government. The government does not have the same right to control my actions and set those rules that I have over my children until they're out of my house. So that the analogy is not correct. The analogy of what I would do as a parent compared to what a government should do to me is not applicable.
Okay, but what I'm trying to argue here is that your actions have an impact on me. And so if you make irresponsible choices,
then punish me for them.
But I would rather not punish you. I would rather just prevent you.
Control me.
Yeah. I would rather prevent you from making those poor choices.
You would rather control me.
You don't have to be punished.
I would rather be free.
And I don't have to bear the expense.
I would rather be free and punished for my wrongdoing than controlled to be, quote, safe.
I like that.
That's the difference.
I like that and I respect that, but I just don't think that's reality. I think
your reality leads us to the large government that controls people.
To some degree, yeah.
And that's I can't give to that idea.
Sure.
I can't stand and accept that. So I have to fight that, because I believe in the individual rights of people to do. If they do something wrong, then punish them to the extent of the law. And if I don't want to be punished to the extent of the law, I will control my actions. If I don't control my actions, then punish me. Don't let me get away with it. Don't let there be a whatever it is, a settlement or a backdoor out, or you punish them to the extent of the law when they break the crime. But don't punish me when I haven't broken any law. Don't confine me and control me and take away my own responsibility.
Yeah, the Greeks experimented with this. I think it was the ancient Spartans had what they called eunomia, which meant the good laws. And they were called the good laws not because they were these wise or just laws necessarily, but because they forced you to be good because the punishment for virtually all the crimes was so severe. And as one Greek philosopher, or actually I think it was a ruler actually said, dura lex sed lex. The law is harsh, but it is the law. And so the ancient Greeks and Spartans dealt with this. Feudal Japanese society, there's virtually no crime because there's only one penalty for breaking any law, and that was death.
Mm-hmm.
So there were criminals still, but they all got the death penalty. So there's certainly no recidivism.
Yeah.
And we could live in a society like that, but then if you have a society where the punishments are so severe they discourage poor behavior, then you end up with a high degree of control like you had in Sparta or like you had in feudal Japan. So it's just another form of control. So one hand,
again, it's coming down to,
you have carrot and stick, I guess, or you have a punitive form of control where I don't dare be irresponsible in Scott's government because I'm going to face a severe penalty that I don't want to suffer. Or we have Marshall's form of government where I know this is the law and I don't want to be fined or whatever. I don't want to be punished. So I'm just going to go ahead and follow the law because I've been told up front that I have to do this. Mm-hmm. I don't have to think it through for myself because I can't possibly think of everything. I'm kind of glad those warnings and tags on the extension cable,
I have to cut them off
I get that
time.
It's common sense, but not everybody has. Common sense isn't common.
Well, don't we have don't we have an overpopulation problem in this world? Wouldn't removing all of the safety
Darwin's
signs
theory?
Wouldn't removing all the safety signs kind
Who's
of
the atheist
help?
here?
Exactly. That's why it's kind of like I don't know if I totally no, but yeah, that's where we stand.
Yeah, and I like your vision. I agree with your vision. And I think it's a fine ideal. And if we could build the educational apparatus that emphasized self-responsibility and thinking for yourself and all that, I would rather live in your world. I would be totally okay with the liberal gun world where everybody owns guns and can shoot them whenever they want if we taught people from a young age how to control and respect and care for their firearms and not shoot people. Just
not even that, just how to control and respect in general.
Right. But my contention remains we simply don't live in that world, but we could. And I think we agree on what could or should be. And the way that we get there is through education. And we really have to revamp education. We really have to rethink it. And I'm hopeful that'll happen over the next generation or two. And who knows what kind of world we'll live in then. I'm optimistic, but for right now, we don't live in that world.
Well, once again, we've come to the end of an episode and we agree. Actually, last episode, I think we disagreed, but either way, we discussed it. We had valid answers, including I don't know. So this has been episode 2 of A Valid Answer with Marshall and Scott. And please join in on the conversation. Tell us what we should have said. Tell us where we were wrong. Tell us your opinions. We'll read them on the air and tell you why you were wrong.
Well,
but until next time,
about it.
Yeah, you can write us in at avalidanswer@gmail.com. And until next time, see ya.
Thank you.